Of the three cars at around £25,000, and it should be the cheapest in America too. Jaguar already sell over half their production in the US, so the American launch is vital to the company's continued prosperity. In its basic form, the BMW 735i costs about the same as the Jaguar, but the options are expensive, and with the special equipment package on this car, the price goes up to almost £32,000. Mercedes are by far the most successful importer of luxury cars into America, and this long wheelbase 420 is the cheapest S-Class petrol model they sell there. But with its expensive options, it comes out at around £35,000, so you could buy a Jaguar and a Golf GTI for the same price. The Mercedes is the oldest of the trio. It first came out in 1979, but it's a tribute to its design perhaps that it still manages to be lighter and have a lower coefficient of drag than the brand new Jaguar. The 4.2 litre V8 engine produces 218 brake horsepower, and despite the size of the car, it really pushes it along. The steering is light and responsive, and on most surfaces the ride is first class, but the car is noisy. There's a lot of wind and tyre noise. On these rough Yorkshire roads, the car was a real handful. A car for the city and the motorway, rather than for diving down country lanes in. And although Mercedes' quality makes other manufacturers envious, I have to say that our car suffered total electrical failure during the test. By any normal standards, of course, all these cars are superbly put together and magnificently well equipped. Everything a driver could want is here. But on the direct comparison with the other two cars, I think the interior of the Mercedes really lets it down. Everything's here, the clear instrumentation, the matched wood veneer, but somehow they managed to achieve an old-fashioned, even austere look, perhaps added to by all this black plastic on the fascia. The big wheel, I think, gives us a sedate feel, added as well by these big, flat, overly sprung seats. The great strength is certainly the amount of legroom, certainly in the front, and of course the magnificent build quality. Now the BMW is a very good-looking car, I think, both outside and in. A great deal of thought has obviously gone into the design of the new 735 interior, and for my money they've produced a cockpit that's really quite difficult to beat. Looks classy, feels comfortable, is ergonomically sound, everything's at your fingertips. Also has a high-tech feel, which I think is mirrored in the quality of the equipment installed. It ranges from, for example, a comprehensive trip computer to a complete diagnostic system. Altogether, I think a very good cockpit indeed. Now, with the BMW, you've really got to watch the speed limits because it's a bit like holding a tiger on a leash. It develops only fractionally more power than the Mercedes, but the remarkable thing is the speed and smoothness which that power becomes available. Add to that the stiffness and the muscularity of the suspension, and you've got a real driving machine. Now the steering is tied into a variable servo mechanism. Basically that means that you get a lot of assistance at low speeds, so it's easier to move the car around and park it, and the assistance falls off as the speed builds up, which means you have to work harder, of course, but the payback is you get much more feel through the steering wheel. Perhaps the most disappointing thing about the big BMW is the amount of tyre noise, and indeed wind noise, surprisingly high for a car with such a low coefficient of drag. The Jaguar just goes on surprising you with its quality. You squeeze behind the wheel, you put your right foot down, there's this deep-threaded purr from up front, and the car literally glides forward. The ride, there is no doubt, is by far the best of the trio, just swallows up the bumps on all but the roughest roads and stays flat and square on the road. And quiet too, by far the quietest of the three cars. My grouses, such as they are, concern the steering, which is too light. You can just wind it on at speed with scarcely any feel at all. The boot is a trifle small for a luxury saloon, and the single windscreen wiper can't cope with a downpour at speed. But overall, this car from Coventry, there is no doubt, is a real humdinger. The feel inside the Jaguar is really quite different from the other two. You don't actually sort of sit on the seats, you sit into them. You get a much more wrap-around sports car feel. You're drenched in the smell of leather. Some journalists even claim they can smell the wood veneer. I don't like, I must say, the combination of old-fashioned dials and modern-type video screens, nor do I like very much this thin steering wheel. But I love the idea of the J-gate, which separates completely the automatic mode from the manual one. And if value for money counts at this level, then you certainly get much more for much less with the Jaguar. You get a standard, for example, air conditioning, these leather seats, self-levelling rear suspension, a trip computer, 6-speaker stereo, all in the standard price. So very good value for money at the luxury car level. So how does the Jaguar compare with the opposition? Well, the short answer has to be very well indeed. In some cases, it beats them hands down, notably in terms of the quality of ride and that value for money. And all the signs are it should really carve its way into the American market. But out of this selection of motor cars, is it possible to pick the best of the bunch? Well, let's face it, all three represent the very peak of motoring. In many ways, they're very closely matched. In acceleration and performance, for example, they're virtually identical. If you want a soft, safe ride along well-made roads, then the Mercedes offers that in abundance. But if you want superb equipment and a first-class drive, then it has to be either the BMW or the Jaguar. They're both superlative driving machines, with the BMW, for my money, just having the edge. But enough of luxury and self-indulgence. Let's move now to the other end of the transport scene, namely to the humble moped. Humble, but it costs only a few pence a mile to run.